Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's top 10 most underrated tames. In at number 10 is the Angler. Now this thing was released way back, and I do definitely fondly remember this thing from Squid's old Ark series, and his last episode on the Bongoman's Island map was taming the anglerfish, and still to this day this is actually a pretty useful creature for some certain specific Ark tasks, especially with their silica pearl gathering abilities, and that is pretty much all they have going for them. But silica pearls, if you didn't know already, are an extremely useful Ark resource, so that is why they are an extremely useful Ark creature which many people don't talk or even tame at all, and they just don't question it as a creature. They'll always go for something else. And yes, there are better sea creatures out there, but the Angler is great earlier on to mid-game stages in Ark, where you can't fully shell out for the most powerful ocean tames, but you still want to farm all of those silica pearls to get your fabrication up to the max. These creatures are really worth a tame at some point, as they aren't difficult at all, and they are extremely useful for gathering up all of those silica pearls. In at number 9 is the Chalicotherium. Now you may think this creature is just utterly useless, or you may think this creature is an absolutely insane tame and 100% worth it. And I'm kind of leaning more onto that side, as this creature does have a lot of abilities which many other creatures don't have. And also, the Chalicotherium has an absolutely insane knockback attack, and it is just a generally good creature for just dealing a lot of damage. It's a bit like a slightly worse Megatherium, which really does pack a punch, and it actually is a very decent travel mount as well. It has a very respectable speed stat, one of what you will not complain with at all, and it does have a wealth of other abilities as well, like it being able to throw literal rocks of, I think, even feces at the enemy player. But this ability will take some time to actually practice and get right, as it is a somewhat difficult ability to control, but when done right, it is a really fun, cool ability which does have many uses as well, as it essentially makes this thing a long-range fighting dinosaur, which many other Ark creatures simply do not have. The only one I can really think of off of hand is the Velonosaur's turret ability. In at number 8 is the Carbenemies. Now I know this will be a somewhat unpopular opinion among many of you, but in my opinion, my personal opinion, I really do enjoy the Carbenemies in the early stages of my Ark playing. In those early stages, it is extremely useful to get yourself a creature that can grind all of that oil and those silica pearls and all of those underwater resources. Yes, I will definitely agree this isn't the best creature out there to gather all of those berries and just harvest general things, as I'm pretty sure this thing can't even gather berries, but if it can, it is still an extremely slow Ark creature, which isn't great on land at all. But when it comes into the water, the Carbenemies does actually have some reasonable speed, and yes, just for reference, this B-roll does have some boosted speed on the Carbenemies, as I think it just looks really funny, and it definitely is really funny in my opinion. Comment down below if you think a really fast Carbenemies waggling its little legs really quickly is funny. You know, some people do, and I'm definitely one of those people. But yes, as you can see here in the B-roll, this is me going to gather some oil from the kind of depths of the ocean. Not obviously right to the bottom, as that wouldn't be great, as your player would simply run out of oxygen. As the time when you're getting the Carbenemies, you will not have the scuba tank. I'm pretty confident you won't. So yeah, you can always go into those lakes and lower lying rivers, and there you'll find some oil and definitely some silica pearls, and that is where I think the Carbenemies really shines the most. In at number 7 is the Beelzebufo. Now I know loads of people on my channel really do not feel as if the Beelzebufo is underrated, and they extremely love this creature, and they think it is one of the most popular Ark creatures. And among quite a lot of Ark players, the Beelzebufo is definitely very popular for its cementing paste gathering abilities. But the fact is, a lot of Ark players as well will simply discount the Beelzebufo, and I was one of them before I tried it, as they will just simply say beaver dams are the most efficient way to gather cementing paste, and there isn't a point of spending all of that time to get yourself one of these absolutely amazing, charming Ark frogs, which now obviously I've turned my opinion over is simply not the case. In insect caves like the one on the island, the Beelzebufo really does shine, and you can gather thousands and thousands of cementing paste. And with Ark being a buggy game as well, sometimes beaver dams don't even spawn and can be an absolute nuisance to find, so knowing that you can literally just find some insects on a Beelzebufo to get that cementing paste is actually extremely useful as well, where you just can't find beaver dams and you just can't find that cementing paste. The Beelzebufo is definitely the best creature out there for reliable, quick cementing paste gathering. In at number 6 is the Castaroides. Now again, you may be kind of on the edge like the Beelzebufo with this creature, as you may either love it or hate it. These creatures do seem to be quite Marmite creatures, as you may just not see the use in taming a Castaroides. But before you have the chainsaw in Ark, the Castaroides is one of the best creatures for gathering wood. And you all know wood is a resource which you will need a lot of throughout the game. Right from the beginning all the way to the end stages of the Ark game, you will need all of that wood. The amount of wood that you will need in one Ark map playthrough is absolutely insane, and the beaver will really help you to actually get you there. And also the beaver is an extremely fast creature as well, and great in the water too, so it is a sort of upgrade to the carb enemies if you still can't get a creature that is underwater capable that actually spawns in the water, like the Megalodon or Ichthyosaurus or Plesiosaurus or Mosasaurus, which you may not have at the stage when you'll be taming these things. And also on top of that, they have an extra little special spicy ability as well, which makes them really nice to use. The fact is, their saddle is just a really nice portable smithy, extremely useful. In at number 5 is the Spinosaurus, and what a creature this is, and also in my opinion, what an underrated carnivore, as the Rex always seems to take the spotlight away from the Spinosaurus. And in my opinion, the Spinosaurus is pretty much what a Rex is, and in some cases it can be easier to tame, as it does spawn in less hostile environments, and it definitely has a lot of really great uses that the Rex simply can't partake in. Firstly, it has a really amazing turning circle, which the Rex simply can't compete with, as it can turn 360 on the spot, whereas the Rex's turning circle is absolutely atrocious, and in many situations it is so bad you can even get your Rex killed because it can't turn around and attack the creature that is attacking by its feet. Also, the Spinosaurus is great in the water too, and I'm pretty sure it does have an oxygen stat, even though it may not as well. I'm kind of a bit in between. It may have had one in the past and now it doesn't. Either way, its oxygen stat is really great, and it is a great underwater creature with creatures like the Baryonyx, the Mosasaurus, the Plesiosaurus, the Basilosaurus. The list literally goes on for underwater creatures, and unlike most underwater creatures and pretty much every creature apart from this and the Shadowmane, it has the hydration buff, so it will do even more damage when in water, which is just simply great, as with any carnivore you always like to have a buff. Sadly, it does not have the bleed ability, but still, that hydration buff is absolutely OP, and when it goes back onto its hind legs, this thing will do even more damage on top of that. It is definitely a great boss creature, and actually overall, I'm pretty sure it does more damage than the Rex, as it can attack faster, and I think its damage stat is higher. Its only real downside is its health is slightly worse than something like a Rex. In at number 4 is the Baryonyx. Now, this creature is definitely one of my favorites, and one creature that I will never forget in my Ark journey, and I'm surprised that so many other people don't talk about this to the extent that I do. And yes, it is not the most underrated creature out there, but I definitely think every single Ark player should have a Baryonyx in their roster of creatures, and they should know how to tame one effectively, efficiently, and know how to use one effectively as well. Yes, Shadowmanes are really great for caves now, but still the Baryonyx is my go-to 100%, as obviously its size means that this thing can fit into pretty much any cave. And compared to the Shadowmane, I'm just more used to using the Baryonyx, and yes, it may not be quite as versatile in terms of travel. In my opinion, this thing is still extremely useful and deserves a use, even though in some cases it is somewhat overtaken by the Shadowmane. Except the Shadowmane doesn't have the secret little ability that the Baryonyx has hidden up its sleeve. When it's in the water, it can literally stun creatures if you press C. And yes, the Shadowmane may have the hydration buff and things like that. The Shadowmane is a really great creature, don't get me wrong. It's just for things like caving and underwater exploration, I will always go baryonyx before Shadowmane, and I would urge you to do that too. And also, they are a lot more accessible than the Shadowmane, as they do spawn on the island. Yes, I know the Shadowmane can be found on Fjorda, at least I'm pretty sure it can be found on Fjorda, so it is free to every Ark player out there, apart from Switch, I think, doesn't have Fjorda yet, and obviously mobile doesn't. But on spawning on the island, it really does mean that this creature is the most accessible that it can be. Definitely worth the tame. In at number 3 is the Allosaurus. Yet again, another carnivore, which some people, again, may say they use all the time. But I really think the Allosaurus does not get the press that it really deserves, like the Spinosaurus and the Barry, as the Allo is by far one of the best boss creatures in Ark in general. And yes, the Rex may have more health, but the Allosaurus does an extremely immense amount of damage in packs, and it is just by far one of the most useful combat creatures in Ark. And with its pack buff, which obviously it will get from being in a pack, it can be buffed even more than a Rex can. And if you combine that with UT buffs on top of that, and the Daedon healing everything, you can have yourself a really, really great boss environment with Allos. And if you do breeding and mutations, you can have yourself an absolutely insane pack of Allos. And they don't tend to be as absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid as a Rex. These things will pretty much never get stuck on anything in the Ark terrain. And also, if you're doing the Overseer on the island, I would probably recommend bringing Allos, as getting through the tech cave with Rexes, just those Rexes, man, they will just get stuck in the lava and they will just die, and they'll just fall in the most stupid places, and it is really, really infuriating trying to retrieve them. So I will always use something like the Allo or the Spino if I'm feeling like it for the Overseer boss on the island. And I've only used Rexes once, and I completely regret it, as pretty much all of my army was killed in the tech cave, as all of the Rexes just decided, I don't want to live anymore, and I'm just going to jump straight into that lava. But obviously, the Allo does not have any of those issues. And unlike the Rex, it has the all-famous bleed ability. Definitely a carnivore to be proud and worth taming. In at number 2 is the Mantis. Now again, this is one of Ark's most accessible creatures, with this thing spawning on maps like Ragnarok. And yes, albeit it may not have the easiest taming method out there, requiring you to passive feed it woolly rhino horns on Ragnarok, or you can use Deathworm horns as well, and you will have to use Deathworm horns on the original map that it came on, which is Scorched Earth. And I get that many people do recognize the Mantis out there, but like the others, I really think everyone should have a Mantis in their roster, as some people may think it's just weak, useless, not worth it. Why even bother with all the prep and all of that just effort to get yourself some really good mantises? And to that, I would say they are extremely great harvesters, and on a map like Ragnarok, these are by far the go-to creature for gathering all of that mutton up, and they're definitely really fun harvesters to use as well. And pretty much any melee weapon that you can think of, apart from tech melee weapons, I'm pretty sure these things will be able to wield and use to such a high level of ability. The only real downside to using a Mantis with your tools is the durability factor to it. But if you have Ascendant tools, then you will have a really great time, as those weapons are not going to break as often. The Mantis is definitely a tame every Ark player should have in their roster, and one every Ark player should tame, and in my opinion, it doesn't get the support that it actually really needs. And finally, in at number 1 is the Carnotaurus. Now, many people wouldn't have expected this thing to be in the number 1 slot, but in my opinion, the Carno is my favorite carnivore in Ark. Yes, I prefer it even above the Baryonyx. The amount of nostalgia I have with this creature and the amount of success I've had with this creature is absolutely insane. And when I did Genesis 1 for the first time, I beat the Master Controller, albeit on Gamma, with the Carnotauruses, and it went extremely well, and it was an extremely fun and useful boss fight for me to have. The Carnotauruses are actually a very viable boss creature, albeit they won't do what a Rex, a Spino, or an Allo can. They are still a really good middleman for doing those Gamma boss fights, and you can definitely push for Beta and Alpha depending on what the fight is, just maybe not with the Master Controller. And did you also know that Carnotaurus, translated from Latin into English, means meatball, which is why I always call my Carnotauruses meatball, partly because it sounds funny, but also it is just accurate to what Carnotaurus actually means. Also, since the Carnotaurus' release, this thing has been TLC'd, now having a second attack where it will headbutt the enemy creature and deal that all-famous bleed ability, which only one other creature on this list so far, being the Allosaurus, actually has. And again, this is something that something like the Spino or the Rex doesn't have, which is why it is extremely useful to have yourself a Carnotaurus, and as always, call this thing Carny Dave. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I would really like to know, what are your top 10 most underrated Ark Tames, as I'd really like to hear your thoughts. But with that, I'll see you all later.